Welcome to the fourth episode of the Break Even Brothers podcast. My name is Bennett Bernard. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Bradley Bernard. Brad, how was San Diego? I know you went there on Saturday for a special event. Do you want to tell us more?
Yeah, it was my fiance's birthday, and so we went out to San Diego, went to Coronado Island. That was a lot of fun. Took the ferry across from San Diego downtown both ways, and then we caught a Padres game. So that was cool. Saw a home run, but our seats were directly in the sun. The game was at 4, and our seats were on the first base side, pretty high up there. And I was like, no, like we're gonna need a lot of sunscreen. And so when we walked over, we sat down in our seats. It was a little bit grueling to sit through like 2 hours of sun because we already had sun earlier that day, and I was like, all right, need a hat, need sunscreen. But yeah, it was a fun day.
That's awesome. How did the sun compare? Because we went to a spring training game. Well, when was that? Back in March or April? I can't remember when exactly that was.
Hmm.
In Tempe, and we were directly in the sun. We were sitting behind third base. How did that sun compare to the Padres game? Like, was it the same, worse, or better?
Probably that one wasn't as bad. I think in San Diego when I went, it just felt like it was very face level, like I couldn't hide from it, and I wanted to, like, walk around and find a different angle, but I liked our spot, and so I was like, "Oh, I wanna watch the game, but I don't wanna leave because the sun's right in my face." But, yeah, I would say it's felt a little bit worse, but I think it's also 'cause it was only, like, 80 degrees maybe, but it
Mm.
just felt, like, way, way worse. Everyone next to us was, like, standing up, and, like, once people got up, you saw, like, the massive sweat stains. And I was like, "Yeah, me too, me too."
Nice. Hey, we're all in this together. Don't
Yeah,
judge.
there's a lot of sweat stains at that stadium.
That's awesome. So you guys took the ferry, so you didn't do the bridge to Coronado, like that
No,
really
I
crazy
parked
bridge?
there because I wanted to find stadium parking and just, like, parking for the day, so I found a parking lot. I parked there, like, all day, then took the ferry back and forth, and then caught the game. So it was a little hard to find parking that was, like, on the cheaper side for an all-day safe lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that stadium is right in downtown. It's a pretty cool stadium. So
Yeah, I
that's
liked it, it
yeah,
was nice. It was huge, so many people too.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, sounds like
How was your
she had a
weekend?
pretty cool day. It was good. It was good. Lots of birthday parties. So, at this stage of my life, my weekends typically are kids' birthday parties. So we had two of those. We had one on Saturday and one on Sunday. So that was a lot
Okay.
of fun, of course. Very busy, gets the kids' energy out, which is nice. And I think there was something else I did on Saturday, but now I can't think of what it was.
I feel
No, just
that.
normal soccer practice kind of stuff. So
Okay.
pretty quiet weekend overall. But yeah, sometimes those are good. Sometimes those are needed because whether it's work's busy or something, it's good to kind of just sloth around the house a little bit. So I'll
Mhm.
take it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did that today. I didn't do a whole lot, just kind of prep myself for hopefully a nice big week ahead. So looking forward to it.
You're getting prepped for this, I think. Prep
Oh
for this
yeah.
episode. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So one thing we've been talking a lot about, like work related stuff, and your role as an engineer, my role in the accounting space. And one thing that has become more of a focus for me as I've kind of grown in my career is attending industry conferences or even just more informal like social gatherings. And so there
Hmm.
was a specific conference I went to, I want to say in 2021, and it was part of like an industry conference. So it was in like the real estate mortgage industry. And I remember going to that and thinking it was awesome. And it was my first time I had attended like an industry specific conference. I think I had been to like other like just social mixers and stuff like that. So it was done really well, and I remember going there, getting a lot out of it, but then also feeling like I was a little just unprepared overall.
Hmm.
And I kind of made it a point that when I go to my next one, that I'm gonna kind of have these things that I'm gonna do. And I've started doing that with like just regular work trips and stuff that I do now. So not like big conferences, but like kind of going when I go and meet people in person because I work fully remote. When I go meet people in person again, it's like I have these things that I kind of try and do just for myself to kind of get the most out of those experiences. So
Hmm.
before I kind of go into my own list, I want to kind of hear from you. Is there importance to attending industry conferences in your world? Have you attended some? And, if you have, what are some that you've attended and kind of what have you
Hmm.
got out of those?
Yeah, I like attending them. I think it's fun to meet a lot of people in person. I've done the iOS ones, so I think I went to one in 2017. Was in San Francisco. It was a Swift conference. I think it was Try Swift, not 100% sure. Went under PayPal, so that was fun. met a lot of people that I didn't like wouldn't have the opportunity to meet in person. A few Apple engineers that had worked directly on Swift, a lot of industry folks who are just at big companies working on cool stuff. But yeah, it's besides doing the mobile stuff, also did web, went to Laracon, I think in 2016, and then went to Laracon again last year. And I think I also went to one more mobile one now that I think about it in New York. I think that also might have been a Tri Swift conference. But yeah, I've been to both mobile and web, and I think conferences are really important because it gets you out of your comfort zone. Like you talk to more people, you get to meet some experts on it. And then I think depending on who you are as a person, some of the conference talks can be really, really good material. Like there's the technical ones that I go to that are, learning new skills. And there's also the kind of the soft skills aspect of like in engineering, you review code, and that's pretty much interfacing with another human being who wrote the code. How do you review their code and tell them how to make changes without being over the top? And so when you go to these conferences, there's like a mix of skill levels and in terms of people presenting the content, like what your own skill level is. But it's just nice to go there, meet people, and see what people are talking about. It gives you a really good pulse on the industry, where people are spending their money, like who is attending these conferences. And yeah, I feel like you can get a lot out of it, but it also depends on how much you put into it.
Yeah. Yeah, super well said. I think that's exactly the kind of takeaway I got from that one I was referring to where, you know, I definitely came into it wanting to get a lot out of it, and certainly
Hmm.
did, but I was like, "Oh, if I wanna maximize this, then there's things I should probably come prepared to do to kind of like, whether it's meeting certain people or talking to X number of people." One thing that always stuck with me, and you'll probably relate to this, of course. So, dad, our dad, he originally was a software engineer, became more on the sales side, and he would always, I think, whenever I'd hear him talk about like his work or just even just kind of just getting together, I think he would always kind of set up these like little missions of like, oh, when I go to this event, I'm gonna talk to 5 people, or even like even more informal, like, if they're like on vacation, he'll tell us a story about how like he got everyone at the bar to like tell them what their favorite vacation was and stuff like that. So I think little things like that, coming with like little missions in mind, that kind of just like, okay, this is what I want to get out of this. Certainly something that I'm trying to do more now. And so,
Hmm.
for example, on my last kind of remote work trip, where I'm going to see people in person, like kind of saying, there's certain people I want to kind of make sure I talk to, like talk to them online all the time, of course, but want to make
Yeah.
sure that like, hey, we're in person. Great to see you. Just grab, 5 minutes of your time if we're all just super busy. So having that kind of specific point of like, I want to go ahead and either meet that person or talk to that person, or if it's not even a specific person, but like, if you're going to a technical conference, maybe there's a bunch of different sessions. Like, I really want to make sure I attend this session. And so, like, from your perspective, do you go into it, or like, has that process changed for you? Like, when you first started going to conferences, is it kind of the same still, or has that kind of evolved as you've attended more conferences and been similarly like, okay, I'm focused on these things when I go to this specific conference?
Yeah, when I was an employee at a company, my main focus was actually to go scout what people were talking about, attend all these talks that I can. Usually, the conferences that I went to were single track, meaning there wasn't multiple speakers. It was, one event followed by another in just one large auditorium. So I would take notes on that, find the things that were relevant to us. For example, in the mobile world, like as we're building out an app, we'd have certain challenges with accessibility or testing, and out of all the conference talks of maybe 20 in a 2-day period, maybe 5 or 6 would be, extremely applicable. And I'd take notes on those and bring those back to the team and say, I went there, this is what I learned, this is who I met. And I think this is how we can apply that learning to help us build a better app. And that was a key ticket because my managers at the time would love to hear that. Like we don't want to send people off to a conference, they disappear for 2 days, come back with, empty hands. And so not
Mhm.
only did it help me learn by like, hey, I had to take notes, but also I deliver results to the team. People will be leveled up by that knowledge, and we move forward. But speaking of going to the company, when I went by myself for Laracon last year, I had the exact checklist that you mentioned of I've talked with these, 8 people on Twitter over the past year, 8 months. I want to go talk to them because there's a difference between talking to people online and actually talking to them in person. I felt that working as like, in the COVID era of remote employer. Like it's way different when you are interfacing with someone in person, then you go online and talk to them versus like just being that transactional online relationship that a lot of these relationships tend up being. So like when I went to Laracon, I was like, hey, I got to meet these people. I want to talk to them. Did I think like 90% of my list, like knocked them all out. And it can be a little awkward at times, like approaching people, especially if they're speakers, like, oh, like this guy, I'm like the 50th guy to talk to, XYZ name. And I'm sure they're like relieved that they did their conference talk, but also like tired of talking to like Mr. No Name who's just like wants to say hi. So I'm sure it's awkward from both sides. But when I was like attending conferences as an employee, I didn't have any of that. It was like, hey, I'm going to show up. I'm going to hang out with my team, which I always was comfortable with. Like, I didn't really push myself to go outside of like, the comfort zone at a conference. And then when I went as an individual, like self-employed, I was like, I paid my own money. I'm going to like get a lot out of this. And so I'm going to go meet these people, chat with them. Like maybe it's like slightly more aggressive, but it's just things that I need to do since like I'm paying for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, calling out too that it can be awkward for sure.
Oh
It's
yeah.
something the accounting like recruiting process is pretty like established. So basically in accounting programs across the country, when you're a junior, you'll start kind of talking to firms and you'll want to get an internship for that summer going from junior to senior year. And then hopefully after your internship, they give you a job offer, right? So that's exactly what I
Hmm.
did with PwC. But it's you get so used to like attending like those social events and like they're what's the right word optional, but like basically if you don't go, like you're not going to get a look, so you try to attend them
Hmm.
all. And in my case, I was interviewing with all four of the big four, and so like I was going to so many events and it was a little bit overwhelming, but you kind of get used to it and you develop that muscle of like small talk in a way. And I
Yeah.
would say I'm definitely not naturally a talker. I would tend to be more on the introvert side. I'm not extreme, but I would just, if I had my choice, I'd probably just have a smaller group, if not just
Hmm.
by myself. So I
Yeah.
definitely have to kind of push myself out there. But, I would recognize when I was getting better at it and better at it. But I remember there's a point in my career where I wasn't sure if I wanted to actually even stay in accounting. There was a point in my career where I was really kind of down. I was just not really in love with where I was at in terms of like trajectory and stuff like that. And I kind of felt myself like shrinking in a little bit. And so going to events in that time frame was harder because it was like, I don't know what I have to offer or like, I don't even know what I want for myself. And so I think the big thing for me with those is like I think some of the awkwardness is avoidable if you just feel pretty comfortable with like what you're there to do and like and who you are. And I guess my point being is that in those moments when I was recruiting, or even now, I feel much more like comfortable with who I am. Like this is Bennett Bernard, the professional. Like I like these things, I don't like these things, and like that is who I am, and take it or leave it
Hmm.
kind of thing. Those are so much easier places to like have those interactions with because you're more sure of yourself. And when you're not, it tends to be a bit more awkward or feels forced. And it just I think it depends on your mindset as you go into them.
Yeah, it's kind of like talking to a celebrity in the tech world. Like you've interfaced with them, you want to go talk to them. You're not sure if they remember you because you only have your Twitter avatar, and they probably get 10 times as much engagement and interactions as you do. So like talking to them, it's like you wait in the line after they finish their talk. You walk up to them, you're like, hey, my name's Brad. We've talked on Twitter. Not sure if you remember me, but love to talk. Ask them a few questions. Don't want to kind of have nothing to say because you've been waiting in that line, and then they probably hear the same question 100 times. So in the back of my head, I'm like, I just want to talk to them and get them in like a one-on-one setting that's more private. But you're kind of in the conveyor belt of like people that are ready to meet you. And so I did that in Laracon, and actually, luckily, I stayed at the same hotel as a few cool folks. So when I was shuttling over to the hotel or to the venue, I met even more people there. So, and the next Laracon that I'm going to next month, I think it's in Dallas, Texas. So I'm staying at a hotel that's probably 20 minutes away, walking distance. And hopefully there's some cool Laravel people that are staying there. If not, I'll meet them at the conference. But it's like it's one of those situations where you just like you want to go talk to people, but then in the engineering space, it's a little bit more introverted, like you mentioned. Like a lot of people just want to code and kind of chill. But when you're out there in these conferences and you paid money, it's like I need to go flip a switch and be a different person and like, be very extroverted because it's very easy to get there and do nothing and kind of like be by yourself, open up your computer. So you really have to like flex a different muscle. And when I first went to Laracon last year, or like when I went by myself for the first time, I had a bit of a struggle of like opening up and doing that. Like when I got there, I told myself that checklist of talk to these 6 people. I think it was maybe after the first day, I was like, oh, like, I think I talked to two and I was like, oh, I still need to get to all these other people. It felt a bit overwhelming. But then there's like the after party, which is a nice opportunity, but it's like a bit loud and people are drinking. And then the opportunity that I like the most, which is kind of a conference hack, is the final day when people are giving their talks. Everyone pretty much takes off early. So I think Laracon was a Wednesday, Thursday ordeal. And on Thursday, it ended at 5 p.m. The conference hall was pretty much empty since people had left, like after the talks. And they're wrapping up the stage and everything. And like, there's no competition to talk to anybody. So I was just going around talking to all the speakers, talking to all the people that were on my list, and being like, wow, like, I was a bit concerned I was going to leave without getting to these final people. And luckily enough, I found an opportunity to do it. And I was like, oh, that made it so worth it. So I got tons of one on one time with people that I'd interfaced with and cared about. And yeah, that was kind of like a game changer for me.
Yeah. I think you mentioned something about like the conveyor belt and how like that is when like it can feel kind of awkward. Like, what do you open with? And
Hmm.
like, you know,
Yeah.
it's almost, and I think some of that comes from it's so easy to come off like transactional. And, if you're talking to someone, especially someone who has like a certain like status as or like an authority on like a subject. So, like, I don't know of anyone in the Laravel space, but there's a person you're like, oh, this person he's the guy or he's the girl, and that's
Hmm.
like who everyone wants to talk to. And like I think from the interactions that I've had with those kind of scenarios on my side, it's like it's best when you try to come off as like authentic as possible.
Hmm.
But of course there is like an understanding too that like, there is like a transactional element to it. And I kind of think about it in terms of like it's almost like tiers where I feel like when you are starting out your career, for example, and like you are going to those events, like you're going there, you're likely going to be asking them lots of questions and kind of wanting to like, have them know who you are, but you don't want to make it all about yourself. Like you're not talking about because you probably don't have anything going on. Like you're there to go learn from them or go meet them
Right.
and like you're maybe inspired by them. But I think as you move up, you do want to at least kind of have you probably have more genuine, like authentic questions about like something that you're doing or like and I feel like that's where it becomes off a bit less transactional. You almost not that you see each other peer to peer, but like you kind of I think your subject matter expertise in the area is better, and so you can probably ask better questions. Or in your case, especially, at one point you were an employee going to these events, and it's a
Hmm.
different mindset than like when you go for yourself for your business because you say, "Hey, this is important for me to know," and I have really like probably specific questions to like
Hmm.
my use cases that they probably haven't heard before. Whereas like when you're an employee at a company, they probably have heard a lot of those questions before if they've done a bunch of those kind of events. So trying to make it come off as genuine as possible, easier said than done for sure. But, I think that's something that again, when the more difficult interactions have occurred, in my opinion, it's when it feels like it's like, oh, I'm just here just to like say hi and I feel like I have to do this, you know what I mean? And it's just like,
Yeah.
doesn't sit as well.
And a funny part is you can kind of stick around the person that you talk to and hear like other intros. And I had done that at the time where I had talked to somebody, kind of stuck around, like hung around within the vicinity and just kind of heard people introducing themselves. And I was like, oh, I actually didn't do too bad because I feel like there's a lot of people that the conversation didn't flow as much or like the intro was a little bit like more awkward than mine. And I was like, oh, okay, like I'm not a super social person and I can definitely overthink things, but I feel like the delivery was good enough that I didn't stand out and like, oh, I love Brad, but like, it was good enough that I was one of the few that maybe not forgotten, but just didn't stand out as like, oh, that wasn't great. There's definitely people that come up with questions that are super difficult that I think speakers don't want to hear. Like, hey, I have, a minute or two to talk to you about. If I come up with this really complex MySQL question, for example, I'm not going to hold the line and answer for 10 minutes and ask you all the nuance like details about it. I'm just going to say, hey, like, let's talk about this offline. So it's like finding the right question to, take 45 seconds or a minute, sharing your own personal information with them, hearing personal information about the person you're talking to, and then, kind of moving on. Like, you want to have a bite sized chunk and like not much more past that, just to be respectful of everybody's time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like if you ask me a question that complex, like, you have to pay me for that answer because
Right, right. I
we
think
gotta
that's
get a whiteboard
valid.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you've been to the internal conferences, but now that I'm looking back on it, I also went to an internal mobile conference while I was at LinkedIn. So I think it was on the Microsoft campus. They flew out like Microsoft people and LinkedIn mobile people, and they basically just did cross team sharing or like cross company sharing of like best practices. I think there's presentations from the Outlook team, Microsoft's iOS side. They were super like intelligent about how they built the mobile app. And then we had LinkedIn people talking about it. And I think the theme of that one is more architecture. And it was cool because we could talk about things that are a bit harder to share. When you go to these conferences that are external, everything is a bit more generalized. Like, hey, at my company, we do this, but we can't really tell you exactly what we do. Like at these internal conferences, people are showing code or talking super deeply about a process, and we could go adopt that and we could go chat them after the conference. Like we're in the same company, effectively. So those are fun, and I think the outcomes that you get from those are also similar to being an employee where you want to go return with findings, but you don't feel like the social pressure, and it's much more comfortable because you know more people. Whereas when you go to the conference as an employee, you know a lot less people. It's easier to stick to like the people you know and not network as much. The internal ones are kind of fun because it's a great mix of like super applicable. You know a lot more people, and if you don't, it's easy to get to know them and then stay in touch with them. So I really like those ones.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you prefer, maybe you don't have a preference, but do you think about, like, you get the most enjoyment or most fulfillment out of, like, highly technical conferences that are about, like, specific code or, like, specific, features? Or do you feel like the
Hmm.
ones that you've gotten the most out of have been a bit more general, but maybe have a more of a focus on, like, the social element? Like, where do you feel like of the ones that stand out to you that have been like, "I had a great time and I got a lot out of that," where does that kinda balance lie for you?
Absolutely, the technical stuff, at least to begin with, because when I'm evaluating conferences, especially for my employer to spend money on, it's who's speaking. Like it has to be people that a good roster at least to speak, and then what are they talking about? If it's all these topics I don't really care about, not as exciting. Like I show up there because of the roster and the topics, and then I try to find value like within those. But there can be a good lineup and a good roster, and the talks just either aren't good or like I'm above or below the skill level that they're talking at. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that needs to fit for it to be like a knockout of the park. But definitely initial evaluation is who's there, what are they talking about, what location is it? 'Cause a lot of times there's a restriction to US only where I think I tried going to like a Sweden conference and the budget was just insane and there was like 50 seats or something. And I was like, oh, that would be so cool. But like realistically, it wasn't worth the company's dime to pay for that. So it's finding like a popular conference which attracts the best speakers, attracts the best topics, and usually is relevant topics for building, mobile and web apps. So I don't think I've ever been to any like social first conferences. I think I would like to try one because I've been to like only technical, but yeah, I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah. I also enjoy when they're out of town a bit better than when they're in town because it
Hmm.
feels like you can kind of like, it's the right word. Like you're just there to like do that thing. And like, that's kind of like you wake up, you go to the conference. If there's like a social gathering after or like an after party, as you call it, like
Hmm.
you're there and then you can kind of go back to the hotel and it's like you're kind of, I say locked in, if that's too intensive a word.
Yeah, you can't
The
escape.
conference, yeah, like, you're just in that mode, like, yeah, I get in a mode, it's like, I'm like, "This is the mode I'm in this week," and,
Yeah.
that's who I am, and, like, when I, either I get back home or when I'm not doing the conference, I'm back in normal work, it's like a different, it's
Hmm.
not a different person, that's too dramatic, but, like, you're just in a different, like, mindset of, like, what you wanna do that week, and so, when I went the conference I went to that I was referring to earlier was actually it was a Mortgage Bankers Association, like, finance and accounting conference. It was my first one of that kind, and it was in Nashville, which was super cool. It was my first time being in Nashville too, so I was like, "This is great. I get to go to a city I haven't been before, check it
Hmm.
out," on the company's dime, right? It wasn't like a sponsored thing,
Right.
and so got to do that. But then, the content was pretty good. Mentioned something about skill level, and it's like there are certain sessions I sat in where I was just probably above the skill level that was intended for the audience, which is okay. So I didn't get as much out of those. But then there's other ones or like the social gatherings where I feel like I got the most out of it. so I did that conference again, I think the following year, or maybe just there was a year gap, but then they did it in Phoenix, and so I went there again,
Mm,
but I was like
not as
driving back
far
and
away.
forth. Yeah, it was like yeah, and it was like an hour drive, so it was like I should still go, but I was like, I have to. I don't. It doesn't make sense for me to get a hotel. It's just an
Right.
hour away. It was still good, and then again, got a lot out of it, but I'd say out of town is the way to go because it's just you can kind of not only is it again you're kind of locked in a bit more, but it's also just fun to see new places if you haven't been to
Yeah.
that wherever it is.
Yeah, I've done New York, Nashville was Laracon. I did Kentucky for Laracon, and then San Francisco. And New York one was awesome because I extended the trip, like, stayed on the company's dime for a hotel during the conference, and after that's like switched hotels and did my own thing. So that was pretty fun. But yeah, absolutely would recommend travel with it because yeah, again, it puts you in a different spot. You can't like really hide. You're in a zone. You're gonna get things done, and it's just like more fun to do things with people. Like while you're at the conference, you can talk to other people and say, "Hey, like, do you want to go explore after the conference, or like before the conference, or after?" So it gives you like an excuse to go hang out with people. Where if you're in your hometown or like somewhere closer or you're driving, it's not as easy to pull that off, and people will be like, oh, you're from here, like come take me around or show me around here. But if it's both people exploring a new spot, that's a little bit easier of like an icebreaker in terms of conversation too, like things flow a bit easier.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm trying to attend a bit more of like a CPA. So every state probably has like their own CPA society. At least California and Arizona, which is the two states I'm licensed in, I certainly do. And so I'm gonna trying to start attending more of those events a bit more. They are typically like in Phoenix or Scottsdale, and so like for
Hmm.
me, for where I'm at, it's a bit of a drive. So I kind of got to get over that because I've been very cushioned the remote work environment to like not driving, and I feel
Yeah.
like now I act like I'm a New Yorker that like I don't want to ever get in my car because it's like I'd rather just like yeah if it's 5 miles away I don't even want to go. But try and start to attend a bit more of those and get some stuff out of that as well.
Yeah, I would love to do a conference as a speaker too. It's on my bucket list of things to do, like present something that's deeply technical, but also approachable at a lot of different levels. So each level gets something out of it, which I really love as a talk because if it's super technical, you've eliminated like 80% of the people there, and the other 20% are like, oh, this is the perfect content for me. So it's hard to
Mhm.
find that right level of skill to say, you know, important, not over my head, and also I can translate it to like whatever my company's doing to bring things back. So haven't done it yet. Like you got to build up the Twitter cloud or like the online reputation. Then you have to go apply to these conferences saying, here's my topic, here's like a rough proposal. Then you have to get approved. And then, I think you get a free ticket probably. And then I don't know, maybe a free flight. Not too sure, but it's like a big resume builder, and I've heard there's a lot of job opportunities. So like if you're a speaker, you give a conference talk on building web apps in Laravel at high scale. Like the next thing you know, you open up your mailbox and there's a job offer from Netflix and Google because they loved your talk. You got on stage, you presented something awesome, and I'm like, the rest is history. So it's on my list to do that. Haven't done it yet. Would need to find a good topic, a good conference, and build up that reputation so I feel comfortable. And I'm sure it'd be nerve wracking being on stage in front of, even though they're 500 engineers, like still, like that sounds terrifying to me.
Yeah. Yeah, would you so I recently spoke at like a get together for all of like the accounting org where I work. And so
Hmm.
I want to say it was like 30 or 40 people. Uh and it is pretty nerve-wracking. Like I'm not going to lie, like
Yeah,
I try to
absolutely.
prepare, and it's like it's one of those things where it's almost and I haven't dug deep into this, but I almost feel like the only way you can prepare is just by doing it to a degree
Yeah,
because like you can
yeah.
read as many books as you want, you can like stand in front of the mirror and practice, but like
Hmm.
there's something that's just different about having those eyeballs on you
Yeah.
that is just like oh this is legit, like this is real. And I think when I did my presentation, I think it was like only 15 minutes. So it was like one presentation of a part of a bigger presentation. So,
Hmm.
even that 15 minutes, and I was really glad I did because I've been trying to like seek those opportunities out for myself as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just such a different thing. Like you can rehearse it all you want,
Yeah.
but then you run the risk of you sound rehearsed. So you don't want to sound rehearsed,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah.
best,
There's
yeah.
a
So
lot of things
it's
that can go wrong. Yeah. Like even doing internal presentations at companies, like being remote, like you would think it's like a safety blanket. There's plenty of times where I would do presentations like at Meta and like, oh, I have it down pat. And then like once you get on camera, just things fly out the window. At the end of the day, like people would always message me, oh, that presentation was great. Like really loved what you did. And like usually you get great feedback. There's never been a time where I like completely butchered something. But the amount of preparation that you put in, you think like, oh, I'm gonna be like mentally just 10 out of 10. Then when you get there, it just feels so different. So putting that on a larger scale of like in person, like you mentioned, like even with 30 people, that's a lot. And now it's 500 people. Like, oh, like you definitely got to work your way up. And you could do a smaller conference or like a smaller get together on a frequent basis and build up that skill. But yeah, it would definitely be nerve wracking. Once I get closer to doing it, I think it'd probably be worth my time to start demoing out a little bit of an audience and stage speaking.
Yeah, and it's funny because for accounting, if you attend a session, like if you're just part of the audience, certain sessions, if they're like technical in nature and they meet other requirements, you can get credits for like your continuing education requirements, which
Oh,
is
that's
like,
cool.
yeah, everyone always like procrastinates and does, 80 hours in 2 days, like, which
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense, of course. Um, but so it's interesting though, because if you sit through a 55-minute like presentation and you answer the questions, you get like 1 hour typically is how it works. One, which is like one credit. But I think if you speak, I don't know the exact like ratio, but I'm pretty sure if you speak or if you're the presenter of that material, then I think it's like 3 credits or something like that. So you get more, and it's
Okay.
almost like it almost like just recognizes that like there's so much extra to like being able to
Yeah.
convey that information, like it compensates you better even
Hmm.
in just continuing education. But like you said too, like I mean, it's just I imagine a huge resume boost to be like, oh yeah, I
Oh
spoke at
yeah.
Laracon about
Yeah.
how awesome Django is. I'm just kidding. But yeah, like like you did that, and then like, when you're saying like, oh, and then people are just reaching out to you for a job. I mean, what a world would that would be where you're just
I
like
know.
you're just directly recruited from all these different
I
companies
know.
that have great roles for you.
I think the first coding conference that I went to, I was employed by PayPal, and I couldn't believe all the booths that are at the conferences. So there's all these software companies that are at the software, conference, obviously, error logging, reporting, analytics, whatever. Every time I went to one of these booths, like you have your badge on, they talk to you, and then like at the end of every conversation, me learning about the product, it's like, oh, we're also hiring. Like, here's our card. If you want, like, you can reach out, mention you're at, the Tri Swift conference in SF, and like we'll get you fast tracked. And I was like, wow, this feels like a very recruiting heavy process. Like, I did not come here. Like, I came here purely for technicals. Like my second conference I'd ever been to, first one as an employee. And I was thinking, wow, if like you wanted to, leave your job, like if you came to one of these events and you were hungry, like it almost seems like it would work out. And I don't think it's like that as much today. There's less conferences in person. There's probably less, hiring going on in general. But back in 2017, 2018, 2019, in the tech kind of boom, like it felt like that was a strategic move to find other opportunities. I'm not sure a lot of people did it, but looking back on it, I was like, oh, if you were looking, that'd be a good spot to look.
In the tech boom of all the day in the life videos that ran rampant from all the FANG companies,
Can't comment on that.
that single-handedly, I think, caused all the layoffs. Everyone was just exposing all the non-work
Yeah,
they do.
Elon didn't really help too much.
Before we move on from like conferences and speaking, I was gonna say, and I completely lost my train of thought, but I'm coming back to it now. One thing I'll end up doing too that is just again like it's more of like a personal struggle for me, and I'm curious if you do something similar or if you don't think about it that way. But I will say I don't want to be too rehearsed, so I can't like this is no big deal, Bennett. Like just like oh
Hmm.
off the cuff, like just be yourself, just say your material. But then it's like you don't want to like come off as like haphazard or like unprepared, and so
Hmm.
it's like I
Yeah.
need to know every detail, but then pretend like I don't. And it's
Yeah.
almost like you're like it's such a hard balance to like sound natural and like
Yeah.
I have
Absolutely.
people I work with that are like just naturals, and I completely admire them. And I tell them like that was awesome. Like,
Yeah.
you're so good at that. And, it's just when you can do it well, it makes such a difference. Like there's an economist at the company I work for who is just like very known for like giving awesome presentations. Like everyone always
Hmm.
looks forward to her presentations. They're really engaging, they're funny, but they're also super informative. And it's just like that's become a thing now. It's like, oh, we got to go see her presentation. Like we're
Hmm.
looking forward to it. And it's like that is such a difficult but like if you can do it well, like awesome, and I'm
Yeah.
sure it just does well for your career and
Oh,
your own
yeah.
branding.
Yeah, I face the same challenge. Sometimes I'll write things down as if I had, crafted the perfect speech, and then when I read it back, exactly like you say, it sounds terrible, like, it sounded good in my head, then I read it, and I'm like, "Oh, that's bad." Like, if I ever read that, like, and I came out with it, like, naturally, it still wouldn't sound good, and so what I've been doing now is I'll write something down, I'll read it back, adjust it, and then I try to kinda, like, summarize each paragraph and have, like, a bullet point. So I don't miss anything, and maybe it won't catch all the details if I actually try to run through from start to finish, but it feels way better and, like, it seems more engaging in a way that isn't as rehearsed. Because yeah, you don't wanna be that person who, like, is up there, everyone's kinda sitting there like, "Oh, he's done this a million times in the mirror," and, like, we're not important, like, we're not even an audience, we're just like, like a brick wall, and this person is talking to a brick wall. So I think you wanna be engaging, and there's so much skill and nuance to doing that well. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at it. I wish I was, but a lot of practice, and I'm sure plenty of mistakes, like everything in the world, and then you'll probably be pretty good at it.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to say on conferences, and we can kind of move on to another topic here. One thing that I've also been trying to do, this is more of a more recent thing. Probably the last two like in-person things I've been to, whether it was conference or like a work trip or whatever, is I try to at the end of the day, like just take some notes on like if I met certain people, if I like talked about certain things with certain people,
Mhm,
just to kind of keep it in and go back and look on it like on the plane ride home or, just in the following week because a lot of times there's so much going on like when you're there in person and
mhm,
like it's great. It's you're getting all this information or meeting all these people, but I think it makes a big difference if you like it's almost like you did this I did this when I was interviewing too, whereas like when you interview somebody and you talk about a certain thing, it's kind of customary to send a follow-up email, or at least it was back in the days I was interviewing. And it was always great if you could like tie in like, oh, we talked about this. Just
mhm.
for example, like, oh, if I was interviewing in Orange County, California, and the person I was interviewing really liked the Anaheim Ducks or really liked the Anaheim Angels, talk about the Angels for like 2 seconds. It's like, oh, hey, it was great talking to you. Like, go Angels. Like you tie in something
Yeah,
that like, and so I think even still, like when you're at conferences or you're in person, like trying to remember like what was that one little thing that like this person can remember me by, like, oh, we talked about
yeah.
F1 or we talked about like a certain code library in your
Mhm.
engineering world, like. And so I think writing that down, first of all, writing things down just tends to cement it in your head better, but then also too, you can kind of go back and look on it, and then maybe when you do like a follow up or do a catch up and say like, oh, hey, so and so is great talking to you about this, like happy to get coffee sometime, and they're like, oh yeah, I talked to Bennett about that, and
Mhm.
yeah, totally would love to get coffees. Bringing like a little notepad or just making sure when I'm kind of done for the day back in my hotel, like just taking down those notes, something
Yeah.
that I'm trying to do, and just kind of helps keep it all organized in my head.
Yeah, you wanna be memorable for sure, and I did that at Laracon where when I had talked to the speakers and the people that I had on my list, as I was flying home, on the plane, I was reaching out to everybody on Twitter saying, "Hey, like, it was great meeting you," kind of putting in, like, a little nugget of what we talked about, like, "It's great talking about Livewire," or whatever, like, "I really appreciate your work," and, like, "Just wanted to say hi, like, over Twitter since we interfaced, face to face," and half of those messages, like, took a few weeks 'cause, they're not following me, and so it kinda goes in the void. Then they would kind of reach back out and say, "Oh, like, I remember you, blah, blah, blah." Half of them, like, never answered. And then the other half, like, answered immediately of like, "Hey, I remember you. It was great chatting with you." And then you get that validation of, okay, they're not just that internet person. Like, I've confirmed my status as being a real human being. You don't really know what they think of you, but it's better that than being this like needy guy on the internet asking for all this stuff. So I would absolutely recommend to reach out. Like, I do the same thing for job interviews of like if something goes well, like you got to be yourself, you got to be kind and professional and just like on top of your stuff. Like people really appreciate like follow-ups for pretty much everything. And so if you're at a conference, you should absolutely, if you reach out to people, like put in some nugget that you talked about and be strategic about that, which goes back to the awkward situation of talking to them. Like you want to have something that's unique that puts you, a little bit different from the set of 40 people that they talk to already. So think deeply, but not too deeply, because again, you want to make a mark in a good way, but don't try too hard because then they know too. So it's
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can never win.
Yeah, needy. You said needy, and that's such a great word because like you don't want to come off needy, and like
Yeah.
be like, yeah. I mean, it's there's like that old saying, or like everyone, like no one likes a hungry or like a starving salesman, where it's like you can kind of smell it on somebody when they're
Mhm.
like they really need this sale, or like they really like want you to solve this problem for them. Like you don't want to come off
Mhm.
needy. Like you want to come off with your own point of view and perspective, and like you can ask good questions, but like you said, be professional, be kind, and don't be needy. One thing to kind of take us in a different direction, but you had mentioned it earlier, and I was like, I really want to bring this back up once we kind of move off the topic of conferences. You were talking about when you were going to places, like companies were reaching out and saying like, "Oh, hey, like let's put you on the fast track to interviewing," and it was because you were there in person, like attending these events, right? And where that kind of took me back, or where I kind of started thinking about that, and what you said was like the difference between being like exceptional and being like just regular successful like in your career. And I think even in your case for like doing your own thing, you're not really employed at the moment, you're doing Vuxbite,
Mhm.
but like the difference is so much is just effort and like how much you're putting in. And I feel like that is an example of like, hey, I'm going to these conferences, I'm going and doing the awkward thing of like talking to people I don't know, which is like
Mhm.
awkward for most people. And again,
Yeah.
you're an engineer, I'm an accountant. Those are not known to be the most extroverted
Right.
industries in the world. But just making that tough effort of like pushing through what you might kind of naturally not want to do can just make such a difference in your career. And I'd be curious in your case, like, do you feel like that's been widely true of the people that just get and there's nothing wrong with this, but the people that kind of just do the standard work and they just are happy to doing that, the difference between that versus like being really successful in your work, it's not that big of a gap. It's just that incremental effort that you put in that just makes all the difference.
Yeah, I've always been one to do a lot on the side. Like, I really am passionate about programming and creating things. So, I'm probably a bad example of like how to compare, someone who's doing what they do and someone who's like doing what they love. But it reminds me of a recent podcast that I listened to where this guy put up a job posting. He had mentioned that he got like 1,000 applicants, and the people that stood out were the people that put in the extra effort. So he mentioned a cover letter, a personal website. And if you have a personal website, making sure that your blog post isn't about 4 years old. So just things that, as someone who's like trying to look their best, putting in that extra effort in places where it matters to stand out because he had so many applications. How do you filter that down and get to something that's reasonable? Well, it's who put in that extra effort to go and make themselves presentable. So, I have a personal website. I write blog posts once a month. I have like side projects that are now real projects, real products under Vuxbite. And I think with all that effort, like it's more normal for me. And I think like putting that in, like I love it. But comparing it to like the average person who might not put as much effort in after work or like have as much passion day to day, I still think it's viable. Like by all means, you can still advance your career pretty far, but you have to be good at specific skill sets to like progress as an engineer. Like you have to be really good at communication and writing blog posts and talking to people at conferences and putting yourself out there is a huge gain for that. So all that extra effort, as long as you're putting in the right spot, I would say you're geared for success. There's a very few things I think that you can do that can hurt you. So for example, if you like tinkering, with Nintendo 64 games and trying to hack them, maybe not won't help you write a better mobile app, but just being like more technical and learning about the deep understandings of some of these things can never hurt you. So I think it's good to put in the extra effort where you can. I think you should be mindful about where to spend that extra time if you're trying to look your best, but I don't think it's fully required. But in certain situations, it might be. Not sure if that answered the full question.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, yeah, definitely, just it's your perspective on it. I think
Hmm.
you know it's almost like what you do with that information too, like to take it back to your Nintendo 64 example. Like maybe you learn that and you get super technical about hacking Nintendo 64 games, but like, do you apply that? And like, can you use, and then, I don't know if that's just would just be someone's hobby, but like, can you apply that
Hmm.
somewhere to the person who ultimately gives you a check? If you're working for a company, like, can you apply that knowledge that you got
Right.
from that and like take the extra step? And just kind of taking that extra step is really a lot of times the difference between like an A player and like a B or C player.
Hmm.
One thing that's we talked about before how you're probably consider yourself fortunate that like at age 12, I would guess, like you kind of knew exactly what you wanted to do, and like not everyone is like that.
Mhm.
So let me pose this question to you in this way: a lot of times, effort is really more of a challenge when you have to do something that you don't want to do, but like you have to, whether it's, by force of your job or like you have to because it's important to do so, like your taxes. Like no one wants to do their taxes, but like you have to do it, otherwise you're going to go to jail.
Mhm.
So I guess in your case, can you think of any times where like, in your career where you've like, "Oh, I really don't want to do this, but I'm still going to give like an A effort versus like a B or like a, yeah, or versus like, oh, I'm just going to tick this box and kind of, just get it done, but not really put too much into it, not apply too much on it."
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's definitely things as an engineer that I don't like doing, and it depends on like the team that I'm operating on or the project that I'm working on. There's could be a handful of honestly anything. Like there's code that is hard to work with, and maybe I'm adding a feature to this mobile app, but it's built in a way that's just really hard to do it. And so you can spend, 10 hours trying to understand the code, figure it out, fix other people's bugs, and then you finally get to what you wanted to do. So the end goal of me writing feature code to add a new feature, awesome. But me getting there along that process and spending the, not fun hours doing things that I don't love doing, not super fun. But I feel like I still give most everything like an A effort. Like I'm not really one to like, oh, just because I don't like this, I'm gonna drag my feet. It's like, yeah, like I don't think there's any job out there that you're gonna love everything. And so for the parts that you don't like doing, like might as well get better at it and put yourself in an uncomfortable spot or put yourself in a spot where you need to learn a lot, get better at it and move on. Then you can get to the spots that, you like better and you can spend more time there. So like I feel like as I've grown in my career, the more times I'm doing presentations or like interviews or being the interviewee or just like putting myself out there and exposing myself to the uncomfortable, the awkward, it has like always turned out in my favor. So as long as you can keep pushing yourself, I think you're going to do just fine. And it's when you get in that stage where you're not, pushing forward and you're kind of, oh, I don't really care that much about my job or I don't really care much about this project, then like you'll lose motivation, you won't challenge yourself and you kind of get stuck in a rut. As long as you can keep putting yourself like a new challenge in front of you, whether that be, at work or you can kind of craft your own adventure. Like if you're doing a project, maybe you invent some new challenge for yourself. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely things I don't love, but at the same regard, there's tons that I do, and I'm lucky to have a job that I do majority of things that I like. But either way, I think you got to be wearing plenty of hats, like in this, kind of economy in this like structure. You really can't just be that one person who does this one thing really well. You got to be flexible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, yeah, this actually impressed me. I remember when we were in high school, or I guess I was in high school, maybe I was in college and you were in high school. I can't remember what it was, but when I was a kid, when I was your age, I remember like being like I was just playing Oblivion and like skateboarding, and then you would like be like coding stuff, and part of it was like you enjoyed that stuff, but then also too like
Hmm.
you were making money from it, and I was like, that takes some internal discipline and effort to like not just play Oblivion and like do frankly, what like a normal kid does. You were a normal kid. I'm not trying to paint you out to be some weirdo, but like, you would like, you would definitely like be like, I could easily just play Gears of War, but I really want to do and build out Iron Follow, or I really want to do this. So, it's something that's internal. Like, I think that's something that you just,
Yeah.
you sometimes people just naturally have it, or sometimes people have to work more towards it. But layering in like always seeking a challenge. Like if I don't have a challenge that I'm like working on, like or I'm like looking forward to, like that's where I feel like I'm in my lowest point. 'Cause it's like I'm not learning anything. I'm not being challenged. I'm not being, utilized to like what I think is the best of my abilities. Like that's a spot that like I don't want to be in. You know what I mean? Like, and so I'll
Hmm.
try and find ways to like get myself out of that. But sometimes people don't realize that they're in that. You know what I mean? Like they're just so busy with the hamster wheel that they don't realize like
Yeah.
I'm not being challenged. I'm not learning anything. And so always just having the awareness of like, am I being fully utilized? Like, can I do more? Like, what would doing more look like in my role or
Hmm.
in my company? Whatever your situation is. But yeah, just always staying, always trying to improve. There's
Hmm.
there's a really good speech by Ray Lewis, who's like an all-time linebacker, Hall of Famer in football, and he's like known for like doing speeches that would like make you want to run through a wall. So like it's very on brand for him. But he has a speech that basically is like says like effort and like passion is free. Like no one can make you run to the ball. Like that is only going to come from you. Like, you know, coach isn't going to make you run to the ball. Like it's only going to come from you. And it's like you can listen to that speech and be like, oh, I'm ready to get this tax return done. You know, so you're like, damn, let's do this tax return.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's something always to kind of keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, and when I first started coding, I think that was part of the beauty of it was everything was new to me, and there was so much content to grasp and so many concepts that I knew were going to be important when I like built these projects in high school that it was just like YouTube every day during summers, like MySQL videos, PHP videos, PayPal API videos. Like there was so much content that I knew I had to piece together, and it was free, accessible, and like building a website at that time didn't cost a ton of money. It was just renting a server for $10 a month and a domain for $10 a year. And I was just off to the races, like 8 hours a day, putting in tons of work. But I just loved it. Like days would go by fast. Like I'd sit there, code, and it'd be dinner time, and I'd be like, wow, like that was like pretty fun, and I'm excited to do it again tomorrow and for the next full week, and repeat that 4x. And then when summer was over, I was like, damn, like at least I built something that I loved, and like it, most of the time did okay. But yeah, it was a fun time. Like now when I learn programming and learn new concepts, I don't have the same like, oh, everything is new. But it's really fun when I change languages or put myself in a different spot, and I do have that like kind of renewed passion. Picked up Rust for a little bit on a project, and it felt the same way where I'd never used it. Opened up like an open source program in Rust and looked at it, and I was like, "What the heck is this?" Like I know Swift, I know like C, Python, tons and tons of languages I've touched, and that thing just looked quite different. And then I got in the weeds. Like I got super into it. It was like a challenge to me of, oh, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make it better. And at the end of that, that was like a super fun challenge. It just felt like being like naive and new again. And it kind of reminds me of having new college graduates join the workforce. Like you get these people in here who have had, fresh learning, fresh teaching, fresh perspectives. And it's like, what can you learn from these people where they might not have the experience, but they just have a different point of view on it. And it's like having that newcomer's point of view can sometimes be super beneficial.
Yeah, and I think in any career, at least I'm this way. It sounds like you're definitely this way. I think a lot of people are this way. When you are engaged in something that's challenging, but you're learning a bunch and you feel like there's a reward or there's a payoff, like in terms of like this website's going to do something for me, or like this
Hmm.
automation is going to save me all this time. It's going to, this is going to lead to a promotion. It's going to lead to a bonus. Like when you feel like you're in that area where you're being challenged, you're learning, and there's like a means to an end for all this, or like there's like an end goal in sight, that work doesn't feel like work. Like you are just
Hmm.
intrinsically motivated to like, I'm excited about this. And like that's where like, people go into their day and they enjoy it versus
Yeah.
the areas where it's like, this is really low value. I'm not interested. I'm not learning. And like, this is just doesn't get me anywhere. Like that's the exact opposite. So yeah, it's definitely something that be aware of, make sure like you're doing the right stuff. You can't only have the like exciting, amazing
Yeah.
stuff. Like there's always gonna be a balance, like again, no one wants to do their taxes,
Yeah.
but just trying to have that balance be, I guess not even a certain ratio, but just like where you feel happiest at. You know what I mean? And it's just like
Hmm.
that's as long as you're in that sweet spot, then you're good.
Yeah, it is such a sweet spot. And then this is a casual reminder to everybody. It might be worth checking in, see what you're doing day to day, see if there's any other challenges you could take on or kind of modify your work or talk to your manager or other teams or directors or anything up the chain to see if there's opportunities where you could push yourself to see if there's any new learnings, new challenges to take on because it might feel uncomfortable, but I think once you get down to it and you put yourself in a new position where you're kind of out of your comfort zone, that's where you level up the fastest. It's really a spot where if you have to do something, you're going to do it and you care about it and you're going to do it well. And the combination of those two, putting in time, being uncomfortable, is really going to add up to make yourself like much more successful and a wider skill set. So, just
Hmm.
a casual reminder to all the listeners out there.
Yeah. I could say another 30 minutes at least on that topic, but let's pivot a little bit. What are you looking forward to this week? What's on the horizon for you in terms of Vuxbite and things that you got going on?
Yeah, it's honestly probably one of the biggest weeks I've had in, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. So I've gone over the long, painful decision-making process of understanding where I want to be, where Vuxbite needs to be, and what the future looks like. So the TLDR is that I've been working on Split My Expenses mobile app. And so this is something that I wasn't super thrilled to build, to be completely honest. I had built it as a web app to begin with, so you could build Split with friends. Then, the number one customer ask comes in saying, build an iOS app, build an Android app. And I get it. All the apps out there that do bill splitting have a pretty first class mobile use case. It's just I had built my site originally as a side project, then it became a project, like a product, and that's kind of where we are today. And so over the past few months, I've been kind of dragging my feet. Oh, I don't want to build this. At the end of April, I decided, hey, I'm going to build this mobile app because that's what I need to do as a product. But I was really kind of tossing between the idea of like, how is that going to make me more money? And the sad answer, or at least the more realistic answer, is it's probably not. It could, but it's not going to, make my revenue shoot up 20,000% of where I want it to be. So as I started building it out in my head, I was like, okay, it's not a huge money maker, but I feel like it completes the product as a full like web app and mobile app. And so with that kind of decision in mind, I was thinking, well, the finances for Vuxbyte aren't anything what they were as working full time. So how do I get back to something after I've done my 12 months that can kind of bring the finances back in check? And so this past week, been kind of brushing up on the resume, understanding what I want to, put out there for myself as an individual and kind of marketing myself again. So using a lot of AI tools to spruce up the resume, just like talking points on like work that I've done at companies. So yeah, I'm getting back out there, putting myself out there on the market, looking for like senior to staff iOS engineering roles. So I'm pretty much an open book at this point. Like, we have the podcast, obviously. Like, I work daily on Twitter, kind of post what I work on. My resume says a lot about stuff that I've worked on. Like, people can contact me. I'm very open. So I'm curious to see how this job search is going to go. I think it was really hard for me to decide to kind of like soft pause things. I want to go find a job, in the next few months. And I want to like get the mobile app out as well. But the mobile app is a little bit on a pause just because like I want to get a job sooner than later. So I was maybe 65% done with it, then said, hey, given my 12 months, given how the trajectory of things look, I'm happy with the products that I made. It's just not making the same amount of money. So what can I do to get back on track? So I'm going to start interviewing pretty soon. Going to start applying to places. Going to post on LinkedIn. I think by the time the pod is out, I'll have a post on LinkedIn, kind of announcing back on the market. So if you're listening to the pod as an employer, please reach out. But yeah, a little bit of a tough spot because as a founder, you think, oh, this is my baby. Like I can't step away from this. People love it. You got to disconnect from that a little bit and think like, hey, I need to do what's best for myself. As much as I love supporting these people, and sometimes I don't love supporting them, but for the most part, I do. Like I got to step away, do what's best for me, and I think this has come after like a lot of thought. So yeah, an absolutely big week.
Yeah. Well, that's cool because I think, it's good to give people also the same like realistic picture because I think I certainly see this in my own industry of, you hear about people that left and like made their own business or something like that and they're like, oh, how amazing it is. But then
Hmm.
you only hear, and I don't want to say the successor stories because that's not what I'm hearing from you at all. But like typically that's the only voice that's amplified versus people that just say like,
Right.
hey, went and did this. And maybe they're doing fine, but they're like, isn't for me. Like, I don't really like this. And I go back.
Hmm.
Like, that doesn't make the headlines on Indie Hackers or,
Yeah. Yeah.
Accounting Today. Right. And so I think it's going to be nice, I think, people to have the appreciation and hear your thought process. Cause I had talked to you. I'm like, why don't you do like, consulting, or why don't you do like more like agency work where like,
Hmm.
people hire you to build out like their projects, stuff like that. And you're like, I'm not interested. So it's like,
Hmm.
what I hear from you is almost like, hey, I did this thing for you. I really wanted to try it out, but I'm also ready to try something new and dip my toe back into, the employer market. So yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd love to do a podcast episode on like a day in the life of like a founder, because it'd be great to like. I'd be so curious to hear like, you know, when you're working for yourself and you're trying to build out a product, like do you wake up? You know, like what time do you wake up? Like what's your morning routine? Do you do like the cold plunge and the 4 a.m. or like what do you kind
Oh
of?
boy.
So we'll save that for another podcast
Oh
episode.
yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. So yeah, we'll look forward to your blog post, and yeah, any companies that are out there. This dude's
Yeah,
got the
I mean,
chops. Check him out.
I think it's just being more realistic and honest with yourself. Like as I thought about my decision making and moving forward with being back out on the market, like I could hide it and say like, oh, like FuckSpy's doing super well. And again, there's two ways to look at it. One is like, is it paying the bills or is it like fulfilling and have I loved the time that I spent there? I think is it paying the bills is an easy question. There's no secret behind it. I'm happy to say it's not. And again, would I have liked it to? Of course, like that's the end goal, like forever job. But I don't look back or like regret any of the 12 months that I've spent. Like the amount of learning I've had, the amount of like just grit I've had to put in doing like a day to day working for yourself and like the crazy things that I've uncovered, like in terms of mental health, like that I didn't expect to, hit me as someone who thought, oh, it won't be that hard, And there's plenty of stories I've had like in high school that we'll probably get to of like super successful projects and that kind of pushed me to get here. And I thought, oh, I can like recreate some of that success. Ultimately, there's a lot more to it than just writing code. There's timing, there's marketing, there's like just having the right customer profile in general. So yeah, it was a tough decision, but I think when I look back on this time, like even just talking about it, like in 12 months, I think it'll be the right thing. I've created a solid two products. I think there's a lot of room to grow in both. I'm not really working on Chatty right now, but I think with all the AI innovation, there's space to make a big impact there. And I think once that mobile app is out for Split My Expenses, it's going to be a game changer. And I think I'm not depending on the revenue to like pay my bills. I have a much more different freedom in essence to like do what I want. So it's going to be an interesting next few months. I am going to make like a blog post about it and talk customers that I have on both the products. But I think I've tried to be myself the whole time. Like I've never hid behind like the company or the product. Like I'm like, hey, this is me. I built it by myself. When people ask for things, I've also told them I have a long list of customers. I have a long list of asks. I'm just one individual. Like I appreciate your feedback, but to be completely honest with you, I don't want to lie to you and tell you it's coming out tomorrow. It's probably going to be a few months. And some people don't love it. Other people love it and say, dude, your work is amazing. Like this is the best app ever. And I think being yourself, like everywhere on the internet, is such a blessing because there's so much bots out there. There's so much AI out there. There's so many people who are just not fun to be around. So it's like, hey, try to be yourself, try to be kind, and do the thing. But I think this will be another step in that direction for me where like you mentioned, all you hear is my company got 500 million in funding, we just blew up, like. And to be fair, I've had great milestones that I've shared on LinkedIn, not as much as the 500 million in funding, but like things that I'm proud of and shared and thought were cool. But sharing that I'm open to work or like ready for a job, I think a lot of people will be interested and like reach out like, oh, why'd you do that, and et cetera, like a bunch of questions behind it. But when I started my journey, I was very clear with myself as to like setting expectations of timing and what that would look like when I got there. And being at that 12-month mark, like writing that blog post. If you haven't seen it, go to my blog, check it out. I wrote a 12-month look back on pretty much month over month what I did, how I felt, and like the evolution of my thought process. So a very in-depth article. I pretty much wrote it for myself because I just had so many thoughts in my head. I was like, I need to get this down on paper. So I wrote one of those. I'll probably do another one for kind of the decision to pause things. But yeah, I don't regret a single thing. And I think this will be a nice kind of development in my career. Getting back out there, being back in a team environment will be great. There's a lot of things that being as an individual, working without other people, like you just miss like the social aspect for one. Like, you don't really think about it, but it'll hit you. And so changing the landscape, changing the scenery, and yeah, looking forward to getting back out there.
Cool, cool. We'll stay tuned for the LinkedIn posts, and yeah, excited to see that come out. Cool.
Yeah,
So before we wrap this up for good here, let's go into our bookmarks or our kind of saved interests for the week.
let's
I'll
do it.
start. So I'll kind of preface this by saying I've worked with Django, and Brad has tried to sell me on Laravel since for years. and I would love to be
for his own
there.
good.
Yeah, and I'd love to be there. I do follow some of the Laravel people, and we could talk about this in another episode. But like, the Laravel community is very active. They seem very
Mhm.
collaborative and very open. I haven't seen that as much with Django. It's just, I think it's a sleepier framework,
It's
but like
okay.
it's
It's
Python
okay.
based. So like, yeah, so it does the job for me, and that's where my comfort zone is. But anyways, the point being is all the projects I've worked on with Django, where I felt like it was always really a struggle, was integrating the ease of use with Django, like on the back end, with like all the modern and like super cool tooling that like JavaScript frameworks like React, Vue use. And so always just pairing up that like really modern front
Mhm.
end with like the nice, easy to use back end of Django. And Tailwind too, for like the CSS, and yeah, all the CSS styling looks super clean. But I've always tried to like plug that into my Django projects to no success. So that's always been a point of frustration. That and deployments, which we won't get into, but like those two things is what like has stopped some projects I've had like dead in its tracks, because I get all the code done. It works beautifully when I
So
just
sad.
run it on my local server, and then I go to deploy and it's like the whole Nginx crap doesn't work, or it just looks like it's built from 2008 because I don't have any good styling on it. So there's a link to an article from testdriven.io about building components with like Tailwind, and they use a stimulus, which I was not familiar with, but basically it's just like Alpine JS, which I am familiar with from you actually. So I read through part one. I haven't done the actual coding exercises with it yet, but super optimistic to get through that, because I feel like that might solve one of my pain points. The deployment is still TBD, but um, like just the walkthrough that they went through in that article, super detailed, and I think that's like my exact problem, because I would love to build and just use the Tailwind templates and components that they have, because those look just super clean and like don't reinvent the wheel. But so like I'm gonna start looking into that, and I think there's a part two too that I'll link to. I haven't read part two at all yet. I probably won't even do part two until I like actually do the coding, like code along with part one. But when I saw that on I think it was on the May newsletter for testdriven.io, I immediately clicked and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I've been needing something like this for a long time. Excuse
Yeah,
me. So
that's
yeah, so
awesome.
excited about that.
And just quick shout out to Tailwind UI. So not sponsored, but Tailwind UI is probably the best $300 in terms of coding money I've spent. It's a one-time purchase UI library, kind of like what Ben mentioned, just components that come out of the box. So quick plug. But jumping over to my bookmark, mine for the week is from Dylan Verma on X. So he creates a pretty similar bookmark, but he creates marketing UI components for in React. And so his domain is magicui.design. If you go to it, it's these beautiful components like a carousel scrolling like left to right of like what do you call it? Like social proof. So people tweeting like this product is great. There's like these beautiful animations of diagrams that flow into the center point and flow out. So you can imagine like a chat GPT connector is his example. There's all these like floating docs or floating notifications. It's a little hard to explain over voice, but if you go to magicui.design, he has all these beautiful components that you would see in these startup websites like Linear or these like YC funded companies. You go to their landing page, it's full of these beautiful things that as you scroll down, they're popping in your face. They feel lively. So he has those. I think they're for free. I'm not 100% sure. I think like some are for free and some aren't. But he had posted a tweet saying for his design components, the startups that have used it have raised like $10 million collectively. Wouldn't really care too much about that, to be completely honest. I think it's just the quality of the components are great and they're like mostly free. And so my next startup, whatever I do that, whatever I work on, I'm going to use some of these because I think they look great. And maybe the times will change. Not sure when my next project is actually coming out. Don't really have anything, but they look great. So quick shout out to him, and gotta love open source.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, a nicely composed website makes such a huge difference,
Yeah.
especially like with how competitive, and there's just so many like frameworks. I mean, even when I looked at the article I linked, it's talking about like the DOM and like how to manipulate the DOM. I was like, that's
hmm
just It's just not my wheelhouse. But like getting it
Yeah.
done right, you almost can't go live with the website if it doesn't look up to par these days. I feel like it's
Mhm.
just so
People
competitive.
judge it in about 2 seconds, so it sucks. Like, you spend, weeks, months, could even be years, and then they go to your website, "Oh, the spacing is off there," or "The font's a little weird," and then, that small perception change, and you're toast. So, it's good
Yeah.
to, lean on people who care a lot about design and spend, many, many hours where I'm not as interested, but I do care about how it looks, so I'm definitely gonna use them.
Yeah. That's cool. Awesome. All right.
Cool.
Well, I think that should wrap us up. I'm ready to watch House of Dragon. Haven't watched it yet, so gonna be excited for that. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in to episode 4 of our podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. See ya.
Hey, hope you liked that episode of the Break Even Brothers podcast. To find more of our episodes, you can go to breakevenbrothers.com or find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Transistor FM. To connect with Brad, you can go to bradleybernard.com or at Bradley Bernard on X. And to connect with me, you can go to bennettbernard.com or at the Real Tech CPA on X. You can also find us both on LinkedIn. Thanks. See you next time.